The real idea behind generational wealth is, can I build and create something that gives my heirs a leg up? I'm Eric L. Donovan, the Mindset Disruption Strategist. And today we're talking about generational wealth. Actually, what I want to talk about is the 6 mistakes that I'm watching the majority of families make in 2022 when it comes to generational wealth. So let's talk a little bit about what is generational wealth. So this entire idea is, I not only know what I'm building is good for me, but I want this to bless my children. I want this to bless my grandchildren. I want this to go on. The real idea behind generational wealth is, can I build and create something that gives my heirs a leg up? That puts them in a place where maybe they don't have to face the same struggles that I'm facing. But as I said, what I'm watching is there are 6 key mistakes when families are thinking about generational wealth that I'm watching them make over and over and over again. And the reason that that's so important is, whether or not you know this, do you know that 70% of generational wealth doesn't make it out of one generation? And then even if you think that you've done it really well, 90% of generational wealth doesn't make it past 3 generations? Those are terrible statistics. And it's been happening for a long time. But here in 2022, I think there's really some key things, some opportunities to shift the way that we think. And the way that I like to talk about this is, are you building a sandcastle or are you building kingdom? So when you think about generational wealth, are you building a sandcastle of generational wealth that 70% is gone after 1 generation and 90% is gone after 3 generations? Or are you building kingdom generational wealth, which truly can create this desire of what we want? Because again, if the goal of generational wealth is to be a blessing and to provide an opportunity to those that come after me, then why would I follow something that's not working? And yet I see people doing it over and over and over again. So let's get in, let's unpack. What are the 6 things, the 6 mistakes that I'm watching families make over and over again? So here's mistake number 1. They're building sandcastle generational wealth because they're focusing on the impact of their finances after they die. So they sit down and they make a plan and they say, I want to build generational wealth. So when we're dead, we're going to leave the kids and the grandkids X amount of dollars. Now, why is that a challenge? See, it sounds like exactly the thing you're supposed to do. Eric, I'm going to leave generational wealth. It's something I'm going to leave after I'm gone. Why wouldn't I do it this way? Well, because from a kingdom generational standpoint, to really look at how you could do this with success, what you would do is you would focus on the impact to your family, not the finances, through your lifetime and beyond. Like, Eric, what does my family have to do with finances? Everything. See, you don't want to leave money to someone who doesn't have the wisdom or the maturity to handle it. So you got to focus on building wisdom and maturity inside of your family before you ever leave financial resources. And we want to focus on doing that while we're alive and after we're gone. So how do I do things during my lifetime that help build wisdom and maturity into my family? How do I do things in my family that build maturity and wisdom even after I'm not here any longer? And that is kingdom generational wealth. What about number 2? What am I seeing going on? It's about creating inheritance plans that begin after you're dead. I'm going to go back to this. Conceptually, when somebody says this to you, your first reaction is, of course, that is what I want to do. That's how I want to do it. And here's the challenge. Have you thought about life expectancies and where they are today? I mean, how old are you going to be when you pass away? More than likely. You know that the odds makers are saying that in a couple, at least one person will most likely live beyond the age of 90. So, even if you had your kids late in life, what are they going to be? 65? 70? When you die? Is that when you want to leave generational wealth? I mean, I guess so, but by 65 and 70, shouldn't they have already figured it out on their own? But if we're really talking about generational wealth, let me flip this perspective for you. Because from a kingdom perspective of building generational wealth, what if we thought about implementing inheritance plans that go during your lifetime? Two novel concepts happen here. One, your kids and your grandkids can talk to you about why you're giving them the money. You can have a conversation about, hey, here's some things that you could do. You guys could walk together on how these inheritance plans work. But the other reason that I'm a big fan of thinking about generational wealth and leaving this during lifetime is because when do heirs typically need money the most, right? It's when they're starting a family, when they're just getting going. I mean, buying that first house, where do you get a down payment? How do you handle things early on, especially when you've got young kids and paying for education and paying for that is when most people struggle. And if you truly want to build generational wealth, then you give them a leg up when they're starting rather than waiting until they've already kind of done their own thing and they're gone. Do you see how this kind of flips the script? How about mistake number 3 from a sandcastle generational wealth standpoint? It prioritizes the advisor's feedback now and the family input later. See, again, you go and you sit down with the advisors and the advisors ask you a couple of questions and they say, okay, you want to build generational wealth. We do this, this, and this, and here are the things that we do. And then you go back and you're not prioritizing what the family thinks about that. I'm going to give you a great example of this. I had a family that we had partnered with at one point, and they were building generational wealth through a family farm. And the advisors had sat down and set up all these structures and legal documents and everything to pass the family farm on to the kids. The kids didn't want the farm. They didn't get to the point of having a conversation about it from a sandcastle standpoint until we stepped in and said, hey, no, what if this looked like kingdom generational wealth? And we're prioritizing the family's input now and the advisor's feedback later. See, we were able to open them up to a totally different possibility. Let's get the advisors out of the room and let's have a family conversation about generational wealth. Let's have a family conversation about things that we are building and we're doing right now, and using that wisdom, make a plan. So the kids didn't want the farm. Well, I mean, mom and dad were hurt a little bit, but at least now it opened up a conversation to start saying, okay, then what should we do? Should we start liquidating the farm? How should we plan for this? Should we look to give this to someone else? It at least started a dialogue so that when the advisors were brought in to create the plan, it was something that the family had already been talking about. You see how this communication from a kingdom generational wealth becomes such an important element of what is going on. Mistake number 4, from a sandcastle generational wealth standpoint, is this. It's focusing on making tax efficient decisions. Can I tell you over and over again, I've seen incredible tax plans, incredible estate plans for generational wealth that were awful for the family, that created chaos, that created mistrust, that created misunderstanding. They were great tax efficient plans, but it builds sandcastle. When we're talking about kingdom generational wealth, the way to think about this is focus on making preparation decisions. What do I mean by this? Getting your heirs prepared for what they're going to inherit, for the wealth that you're going to leave from a generational standpoint. Maybe we've said this, there's wisdom things that need to happen. There's maturity things that need to happen. There are lessons that need to be learned. There's interactions that need to happen along the way to prepare the family for the generational wealth. And when you focus on the preparation, the generational wealth becomes the extra that sits inside of that. There are always opportunities to minimize the taxes. Always. There will always be opportunities and ways to get the taxes out of the way. So you're like, Eric, my number one concern is how do we get rid of these taxes? It shouldn't be. Because if you focus on getting everyone prepared, you can solve the tax problems probably more efficiently than you'll solve them if all you're focusing in on is the taxes. How about problem number 5? From a sandcastle generational wealth standpoint, there's this focus on retaining control as long as possible, even beyond the grave. setting up trusts and setting up structures that are thinking, I want to build this generational wealth. Here's a couple of problems. How many children do you have? How many children will they have? How many children will they have? If you truly just try and control this beyond the grave, can I tell you, I've seen problems over and over again. I've personally worked with names of families that if I put out there, I could tell you their names of generational wealth where there's been huge headaches because of what grandfather or great-grandfather did in trying to set up structures to control things beyond the grave. You end up with way too many people spread out who don't have relationship or communication with each other, except for this trust that someone they never even met or had a relationship with set up. It's why we continue to see the statistics of failure. There's huge relational issues inside of thinking this way, but it's like it's become, no, this is what you do. I talk to attorneys over and over again who are like, you want to set up a dynasty trust or something that goes on forever, and they're not thinking about the relational component or the consequences that fall out the back end. It's not a way to build generational wealth. It's a way to build generational disharmony. But from a kingdom generational wealth standpoint, what if we prioritize building relationships and wisdom between 3 generations? And I've already talked about the wisdom and the maturity. And this is about building the relationship. And you say, Eric, why did you specifically pick 3 generations? Well, a couple of reasons. One, in my lifetime, in your lifetime, the probability is you will build relationship with your own children and with your grandchildren. But there's not a high probability that you'll have a really strong relationship with your great-grandchildren. So for 3 generations, if you focus on building relationship, you then can build generational wealth because the relationship has happened. There's also a scriptural basis for this. In Proverbs, written by King Solomon, who is the wealthiest and wisest man who ever lived, he made the comment, a wise man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. It was like he already understood this. 3 generations, his children's children. And as I've studied that, it's really a relational piece. We're leaving an inheritance to the people that we have a relationship with. You're like, well, Eric, I want to build generational wealth. I want this to go on 4 or 5 generations. I get it, right? So if you want it to go on 4 generations, train your children well. If you want it to go on 5 generations, train your great-grandchildren well. And because it's not in this big pile that's then held out for 4 or 5 generations where there's disagreement or people who don't even know each other and things like that possibly happening, they can make their own decisions in each generation, whether to keep it together or whether or not to spread it out and use it in different ways. But you at least put the control and the wisdom into people that you've built relationship into. Finally, the 6th problem that I'm seeing most of on building sandcastle generational wealth is this, is that the family looks at generosity as a missed opportunity to give more to the family. So when generosity comes in and they think about, hey, do you want to give more? Do you want to use generosity inside of your planning? Or the advisors ask that question, it gets built around this idea of if we give money away, we're taking money away from the family. Well, I'm just going to tell you, because I know this for me, even in this understanding, if you ask me that question that way, or you frame it in that perspective, I love my kids more than I love your charity. When I'm thinking about generational wealth, I care a whole lot more about what's going to my family in that essence than I do what's going to a nonprofit or to another good, unless I look at this from a kingdom standpoint. From a kingdom standpoint, 2 things are happening. One, I'm leveraging generosity as a tool to teach that wisdom, to teach cooperation, to teach family unity. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But the other thing is, there are tax deductions and tax structures that you can use that actually allow you to not miss out on as much as you think you do. Actually, what our finding is structured the right way when you get rid of all 6 of these mistakes and you focus on building generational wealth, what you actually find is you can do everything that you want to do for your kids. You can do everything that you want to do for yourself and your grandkids and build this generational wealth. But most families have the capacity to increase their generosity 3 to 10 times more than anyone's telling them right now. And that's with, again, not changing anything about the way they're living or what they're doing for their kids and grandkids. But it's a perspective shift that is required to truly create this generational wealth. And then realizing generosity becomes this tool that is an incredible place to come in and say, hey, how do we use this generosity to teach wisdom? How do we teach cooperation? How do we teach family unity? One of the things my family has done is use generosity to go on a family mission trip every year. And in that mission trip, we've seen different cultures and we've experienced different things. And we've built houses down in Tijuana, Mexico. We've gotten our hands on hammers and nails, and we've been in the dirt, and we've seen how people live in poverty, and we've been disrupted, and we've seen different things happen. We've used it as generosity to make impact on things that my kids and my kids care about, and it's increased harmony, increased cooperation in the families. We've had those conversations. Don't miss the opportunity for your generational wealth to be built through generosity. So I think what you can see if we take a step back is all of us want to build generational wealth, right? It's super important when we think about, I want to make an impact for today, for tomorrow. I want to make an impact for eternity. But if we're looking at generational wealth and we only see it from a sandcastle perspective and we make these 6 mistakes, the odds are we end up a statistic. We end up a statistic of 70% failing after 1 generation and 90% failing after 3. If you want to change the odds, if you want to change the statistics, then think about this from a kingdom perspective. I'm Eric L. Dunavant, the Mindset Disruption Strategist. You can reach me at ericl360.com. Have a blessed day.